The COVID pandemic has highlighted the importance of clear, concise communication from healthcare leaders. Understandable, accurate information from the experts is more important than ever, with Canadians relying on it to make COVID-related decisions that can be a matter of life and death. My next guest's goal is to help make science understandable. But Adam Brown feels the COVID pandemic has revealed the shortcomings and consequences of muddled healthcare messaging. Joining me now is University of Ottawa biology professor Adam Brown, who currently teaches a course entitled The Public Communication of Science. Professor Brown, thanks for joining us.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
Professor Brown, in the last year, since the emergence of COVID-19 as a global pandemic, science really has become a daily part of our lives. How do you think scientists have fared in telling the scientific story of COVID-19?
Well, I think overall the scientists have done a reasonably good job under the circumstances. I think it's important to recognize that this pandemic kind of took us all a little bit by surprise, that we were learning as we went with respect to trying to figure out what was going on, what was the nature of this virus, its modes and mechanisms of transmission, and its potential for causing harm and all of that. I think that one of the consequences, however, is that the public was able to witness this scientific process unfold in real time. And so it might have led to some perceptions that the scientists or the scientific process was a little bit haphazard. There were a lot of incidents of say, contradictory information, correcting ourselves and moving forward. If you remember, at first we didn't really know if the virus on surfaces was really going to be a big deal, and we were all very concerned about touching surfaces on our faces. At first we weren't really sure if masks would have been effective ways of preventing the spread, and so the messaging in and of itself had changed over time. Now, the thing is that this is a natural process of science itself, of a correction in our discovery process and moving forward with sort of a cumulative understanding of this situation. But it could have had an impact on the public of suggesting that we're just winging it and flying by the seat of our pants and proposing all of these speculative ideas. Of course, that wasn't necessarily the case. Everything was evidence-based, and it is a self-correcting process as well.
So it's understandable then that the public would be a little bit uncertain about what the scientists were saying. Like when they said initially that they weren't sure whether masks were useful, and then they seemed to change their minds. There was a little bit of concern, I think, around Theresa Tam, the Chief Medical Officer of Health, people wondering if she knew what she was doing.
Sure, and to give her credit, she knew exactly what she was doing, and given this nature of the circumstances, as we know that we weren't absolutely certain what was happening at first, and the process of science is to propose hypotheses and to see if they hold true, and if they don't, to discount them and to move on with different ideas. I think in Dr. Tam's defense, one of the pieces of information that's recently come to light is that she was lacking a certain amount of support from the Canadian Public Health Agency because it was understaffed or poorly staffed with respect to the scientific expertise that was housed in the body of employees at the Public Health Agency. Something I just read in the news yesterday was that that agency seemed to be suffering from a lack of skilled scientists, including epidemiologists, if you can imagine, in the middle of a pandemic. So that agency itself was poorly prepared to deal with the pandemic, and of course that would have had impacts on the messaging and the information that they could transmit to Dr. Tam. But another very important point is that it was apparent that Dr. Tam was receiving information from the scientist specialists that was not in a format that would have been transmissible or understandable to the public. And so there we're back at this issue with respect to communicating science and the difference between communicating among scientists and from scientists to the public, which are entirely different communication modalities. And it's something that I think is very important that we change in our scientific culture for the future.
So how do you do it? How do you communicate scientific lessons, shall we say, as a scientist to non-scientists? I know that you created a course at the University of Ottawa about this. So what are the do's and don'ts?
Well, I think it's a good starting point is to recognize that scientists in traditional university programs get a lot of experience and training in scientific communication, that very highly specialized form of communication where they're using the jargon words and the very meticulous and detailed, high-level, very complex ideas, which is the nature of communication among and between scientists. But for what I would think is obvious reasons, that doesn't really translate very well when communicating with the public. So the general modality modalities of science communication as opposed to the more specific, specialized scientific communication, science communication involves using language that's accessible to the public. And not to get into all of the details of the meticulous points of all of the specialized elements of the science, but really to transmit the ideas and the concepts so that members of the public can understand the nature of the science, can value its importance, and also can use that information for themselves when it comes to making informed decisions, whether it's with respect to the environment or technology, or obviously, as we have seen in very important ways over the past year with respect to public health.
During the last global pandemic, over 100 years ago, the internet, of course, was not around. It's here now. Does the internet complicate the work of scientists, or does it make it easier when it comes to kind of informing the general public about what's going on?
Well, like every technology, it can be a double-edged sword. And so obviously the internet can be a useful tool for communicating directly with the public. But obviously the flip side of that situation is there's a lot of nonsense out there that really muddies the waters. We know nowadays that there is a lot of misinformation or active disinformation on scientific issues that are important to society, whether these postings are coming from a place of ignorance or from a place of contrarian ideology. It makes it difficult for the public to know what to believe and who to go to for their scientific information. And so that really just brings me back to my main point, is that it is absolutely essential now more than ever, when science is becoming more integral to most, if not every aspect of society in a democratic society today, as well as the widespread availability of information on the internet, that scientists themselves really need to take on a responsibility and play a role in communicating science directly to the public. And therefore, these scientists need to be trained in skills that are associated with public communications of science, because those skill development opportunities are few and far between in academic contexts, at least traditionally speaking. And as you'd mentioned, I'm doing a little bit of my part to create a new generation of scientists who have these public engagement skills in order to meet these needs of society.
You are playing a role in turning around the Titanic. Dr. Brown, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for calling me. It's been my pleasure to speak with you.
All right. Take care.